Hello my dear listener and welcome to our channel. The wicket gate banged shut behind me with a loud report as the bolts slammed home. I turned and looked up at the high walls and large wooden gates that had confined me for the last 5 years. Okay man, just what are you going to do now? I thought to myself. Revenge on someone was at the front of my mind. I didn't know exactly on whom, but I knew I needed to be careful. 7 years at Her Majesty's pleasure was enough for me. Slowly, I began to walk down the shore approach road to the prison. A small group of people waiting at the bus stop on the other side of the main road were watching me. They were probably on their way to work, and I imagine they had all seen me being let out. I suppose they must watch prisoners getting released most mornings. As I reached the end of the approach road, I noticed a small group of reporters off to my right just beginning to make their way in my direction. Damn, the scum suckers had been pestering me for years while I was inside, and now they were waiting to ambush me outside the joint, I thought. Suddenly a car appeared beside me. The door swung open and a familiar face climbed out. "Your car, Mr. Carpenter," the man said, handing me the keys. "I'd say you could do with getting out of here a bit snappy-like," he added, gesturing in the direction of the approaching reporters with his eyes. "There's £500 of cash in the glove box, a mobile phone and your luggage in the boot. Ronnie's waiting at the cottage. He asked if you'd please give him a ring if you decide to spend the night elsewhere." "Cheers, Ralph," I said, sliding into the driver's seat. There was no time to adjust the damn thing. I took off as quickly as I legally could. I wanted to get away from those damn reporters but had no intention of upsetting the local constabulary. Swinging out onto the main road, I headed west, away from the city, varying my speed once I got onto the motorway to check whether I was being followed. It didn't take long to spot the car, a little white one with a single occupant. Damn reporters, I muttered to myself as I turned into a motorway service area. I intended to scare this one off and tell them where to get off. I pulled into an empty section of the car park and waited for the trailing car to follow me in. Surprisingly, it stopped quite close to me. I got out and walked over to it. As I got nearer, I was even more surprised to discover that there was a woman in the driver's seat. "Now look here, lady, I've got nothing to say to any bleeding reporters. You bleeding scum suckers tried to hang, draw and quarter me. What gives any of you the idea that I'd want to speak to you now? Just piss off and leave me well alone," I spat out angrily. The woman sat there with a curiously neutral expression on her face throughout my little tirade, delivered in just about the angriest tone of voice I could muster. Then, I turned and stomped away from her car toward the cafeteria. Look, I was a convicted murderer. I was trying to look the part to frighten her off. But apparently she wasn't easily frightened. I had just sat down with my cup of coffee when she slipped into the seat opposite me. "Mr. Carpenter, first, I need to tell you I'm not a reporter. Secondly, I think I can help you and I really need you to help me. Will you please listen to what I have to say?" I looked at her closely. Oh, the look was meant to worry her somewhat, but the look I got back told me she wasn't in the least bit intimidated or afraid of me. I'd say she was about 35 with just about everything in the right proportions and in all the right places, if you know what I mean. Come on, I'd been in the bleeding slammer for 7 years. I was gonna notice that kind of thing. "Okay, shoot. Let's have your spiel and then you can leave me alone, all right?" I said after trying to stare her down and failing miserably. She nodded as she reached into her handbag and pulled out a little folder, just like the one some coppers keep their ID in. She isn't a bleeding copper, is she? I thought to myself. With a deft flick of the wrist, she opened the folder. Helen Caffrey, British and International Mutual Insurance, it said on the card, alongside an extremely unflattering photograph of her. "You're wasting your time with me, girl. I've got nothing left to insure. What my ex didn't take in the divorce, she got in child support and alimony. No, Mr. Carpenter, I don't sell insurance. Technically, I'm a loss adjuster. So, I haven't lost anything that I was insured against. You know, there aren't many people who think to insure themselves against false accusations of murder. You did plead guilty, Mr. Carpenter. I didn't have much choice on that one, lady. Those bleeding coppers had me stitched up like a turkey at Christmas. They planted so much evidence that if my mother had been on the bloody jury, she'd have convicted me. No, with the way those a-holes had me stitched up, if I'd kept pleading innocent, those scum suckers would have had me locked up forever. It's all to do with repenting your sins or some such FING crap like that. So are you now saying that you were framed and didn't kill Mary Simmons? I'm not saying anything. I'm on parole, you know. Yeah, maybe you do know that. Have you been sent to try and stitch me up as well, Mr. Carpenter? Look, my name's Helen. May I call you John? Call me what you like. It doesn't change anything. John, have you got time to listen to a story? Go on then, young lady. I'm listening for the moment. John, my father was a loss adjuster and he taught me the business. Do you know what loss adjusters actually do? Yeah, they come to look at the damage when you make a claim and then try to wriggle the insurance company out of paying out on it. Well, I suppose it could look that way from some people's perspective, but really, my job is to make sure that the claim is genuine and people aren't trying to rip off the company. That's what I said, didn't I? The companies figure every claim is somebody on the fiddle, and it's your job to prove them right. I somehow don't think we're going to find any common ground on that, Helen finally said. You've got that one right, girl. Helen gave me a frown. I was quite pleased with myself. I'd found her Achilles heel. She didn't like being called a girl. Quite a lot of women don't like that, John. Some of us are specialists. We investigate claims that look suspicious or inflated. That's what our real job is. So what do you want with me? I ain't made any claims. The company my father and I work for carried a life insurance policy on Mary Simmons. Hey, what? And you think you can get the money back from me because I've been convicted of killing her? Well, you're out of luck on that one, baby. My ex made a pretty good job of cleaning me out. John, please be serious for a minute and listen to what I've got to say, will you? It's important. Okay, shoot, girl. I won't interrupt again. William Simmons took out a massive insurance policy on his wife 6 months before she was murdered, although he'd taken out a similar policy on himself as well. My dad was still suspicious about it for some reason. The company had to pay out when you were convicted of Mary's murder, but my father wouldn't leave it alone. William Simmons canceled his own policy just a few months after his wife was murdered, and my father didn't like that either. Well, Mary Simmons was a rich woman. When he got his hands on her money, I should imagine insurance was the last thing Bill Simmons was worried about. You knew the Simmons well? Not really, only through business. We handled some of Mary's company recruitment, not much because she was a good boss and the staff turnover was minimal. Look, John, my father always suspected that something was not right about what happened to Mary Simmons and you. Even after you changed your plea to guilty, he still wasn't convinced. What about you? Did you think I stabbed Mary Simmons in that hotel room? Well, to be honest with you, yes, at the time I did, but… Helen suddenly stopped talking. But what? But my father wouldn't let it go. John, have you ever seen Columbo on television? Oh yeah, I've watched a lot of Columbo over the last few years in the Nick. Nothing but repeats on the telly nowadays, and there wasn't much else to do. They don't like to let us dangerous murderers get bored. Helen ignored or wasn't the slightest bit fazed by my hint that she was sitting there with a convicted murderer. Well, my dad, once he'd got the bit between his teeth, was a little like Columbo, he wouldn't leave it alone. Everywhere that Bill Simmons went, my dad would try to be around, just letting Simmons know that he wasn't convinced. You're speaking of your father in the past tense, I commented. Yes, my father died in a road accident some time back. A hit-and-run accident involving a stolen car, which the police put down to joyriders. They found the car burned out later the same evening. At first, that's what I thought it was as well, that is, until I was clearing out my father's flat. I discovered a massive file in his desk about you, William Simmons, and Mary Simmons' murder. I hadn't known that my father was keeping an eye on Simmons. Well, why should he still have been on the case? The claim had been settled right after you confessed. Anyway, it was apparent from that file that my father had been keeping an extremely close eye on what Simmons had been up to in the years following his wife's death and your conviction. You know, Bill Simmons gradually liquefied all of Mary's assets, and the cash all seemed to disappear. Well, my dad couldn't find out what he did with it. He thought Simmons moved it out of the country, but he didn't know where. Dad had a lot of Simmons' movements listed, like where he'd go and whom he'd met, but there was a lot of time when Dad couldn't find out where Simmons had been. You've got to remember that my dad was apparently doing all this in his spare time. My father watching Simmons got me curious, and I thought I'd just have a little nose around. The only trouble was I couldn't find Simmons. He disappeared off the face of the earth for 2 years. Now I've been trying to track him down whether I liked it or not. That is really suspicious, and I really want to know what the hell has been going on. But I'd run out of options, so I thought I'd better go right back and start at the beginning with Mary's death and your conviction. You wouldn't speak to my father when he tried to see you in prison, and you wouldn't speak to me while you were inside either. Will you tell me about it now? I sat back in my seat and looked at Helen, then glanced around the almost empty cafeteria. Well, young lady, I could be willing to talk about it, but this is neither the time nor the place. I've just got out of jail, and to be honest, I haven't got my mind sorted out yet. Give me a couple of days and I might decide to meet you again. Then maybe we can talk properly. I've waited 2 years already. If that's what you want, I can wait a few days. Give me a number where I can get in touch with you. Sorry girl, I haven't got a telephone yet. I lied. I knew there was a mobile phone in the glove box of the car. You give me a number where I can get hold of you and I'll call you. She gave me a card with her telephone numbers on it, and after thanking me for talking to her, she got up and left. I watched her walk away, appreciating the way she filled her clothes. Once I'd given Helen time to get out of the car park, I went back out to my own car. Helen's car was nowhere to be seen. Then it was back on the motorway to check whether anyone else was tailing me. I traveled nearly 60 miles before I was convinced that there was no one back there. Then I left the motorway and began the journey back by the old roads. It was nearing 3 o'clock when I arrived at the cottage. Ronnie McIntosh, my sometimes legal representative and best friend, had purchased the cottage on my, or should I say a Bahamian company, behalf some months prior to my release. In theory, I was renting the place. It was Ronnie who had also laid on the car and everything else outside the prison. With his help, I'd managed to keep my offshore investments secret from Angela's grabbing hands. Where the hell did you get to? Ronnie demanded as I walked in the door. I got tailed from the prison. I don't want every bugger in the world to know where I'm living. It's bad enough I have to tell the parole people. Keep your nose clean and they shouldn't bother you anyway. Who followed you? Some bird, something to do with the insurance company that got stitched up for a big payout on Mary Simmons's death. Helen Caffrey. Do you know her? Caffrey, yeah, that name rings a bell, Ronnie said as he opened his briefcase. He took out a file with my name prominently printed on the front and looked through it. Ah, here we are. But it isn't Helen Caffrey, it's George Caffrey. When they first sent you down, he asked me a few times to set up an interview with you. You told me to tell him to take a hike on your usual terms. And then his daughter turned up a few months back. I told her to forget it as well, Ronnie read from the document. Yeah, well, I think she reckons that the grieving widower might have murdered Mary and her father, I said. No, that was well checked out at the time. Bill Simmons had a cast-iron alibi. The police gave him a very good look over before they even thought about you, and then they did a very nice job of framing me. Look, John, you keep on saying that it was the police who framed you. Just suppose for a minute that it wasn't them but someone else, maybe even Bill Simmons. No, there was no way he could have done it. He'd have needed access to my house and my office. There was no way in hell that he could have planted all of that evidence, even if he did break into the house. No, those bleeding coppers planted it all when they did their so-called searches. John, I know you've always thought that the police fitted you up, but I can't see why they would have any reason to. To get a nice, easy conviction. An heiress is murdered in a luxury hotel, and 3 days later, her lover and local businessman is charged. Very efficient policing. I'm going to bet that more than one promotion came out of that little stitch-up. Anyway, let's forget all that for a minute. What about my kids? When am I going to get to see them? Ronnie didn't answer for a moment or two. Look, Johnny, we've got a bit of a problem there. He finally replied with a concerned look on his face. I don't want to know about your problems. I want to know when I'm going to be able to see my children. In a way, I can understand Angela divorcing me after that load of crap that was bandied around in court, but she could have brought the children to see me now and again. Well, the point is, John, we don't know where to find Angela or the children at the moment. What? She sold the house last year. She's been living in a rented flat for some years now, you know. No, I didn't know. What the hell would she want to sell the house for? It was all paid for and everything. I don't know, Johnny. She wasn't very communicative with me, you know that. Anyway, that isn't the worst of it, John. I sent Ralph around last week to arrange a visit for you with the kids and she'd gone. The flat was empty and there was no forwarding address. Why the hell would she do that? It's speculation, John, but you know she's got a court order banning you from contacting her directly or going within a mile of her residence. Perhaps she's frightened of you. You know you were a little vocal the last time you spoke to her. Well, I didn't have a right to be. She just told me she was going to divorce me because of my so-called affair with Mary Simmons. I expected my wife to believe me and stand by me. Ronnie, get the hell out of here and leave me to think about this, will you? I'll call you in a day or so when I've got my head straight and we'll talk then. In the meantime, find out where my bloody kids are. Before he left, Ronnie ordered me a Chinese takeaway to be delivered and told me all about the cottage, what days the housekeeper came, etc. When the meal finally arrived, I settled down to enjoy my first night of freedom with it and a bottle of scotch. I woke the following morning with the granddaddy of all hangovers. It didn't take me long to realize that I had been woken by the sound of a woman singing somewhere in the cottage. No amount of hiding under the duvet would dull the sound. Then, quite suddenly, she burst into my bedroom carrying a breakfast tray, which she placed on the table by the bed, and then she went over and drew back the curtains. I deduced all this from the sounds and the sudden brightness in the room that was clearly visible through the duvet that I was still trying to hide under. "Good morning, Mr. Carpenter." "Now you get this down, you," the woman said as she unceremoniously pulled the cover from over my head. "The best thing in the world for a head like you must have this morning." "Who the hell are you?" I managed to ask, at the same time trying to make sure the lower half of my body was still covered. Before I went to prison, I hadn't been one for wearing anything in bed, and I'd returned to the habit on my first night of freedom. "I'm Jenny, your housekeeper." "Now get this down, you," she said, almost pouring the very questionable-looking mixture in the glass she was holding down my throat. My God, what the hell was in that? It tasted awful, I said after almost choking on the vile mixture. "A family secret, but you'll be feeling as right as rain in no time," she assured me. "Or dead," I retorted. It didn't kill my father, and he often drank more than one bottle of scotch a night, so it shouldn't do any harm. "Now sit up. You'd better get this down, you as well, you've got to keep your strength up," she said in a very strange tone of voice. Then she picked the tray up and placed it on my lap as I did so. "Oh my, got a little problem there, have we? Eat your breakfast, then give me a call, and we'll see what we can do about that before you have your bath," Jenny grinned at me. Now look, I'd been without female company for 7 years at least, and Jenny, now that I had time to have a good look at her, was all woman in every sense of the word. Maybe a little old and on the buxom side for my liking, but beggars can't be choosers, and from the way she was talking I got the impression that she was raring to go. Whilst I was eating, Jenny left the room. She returned after I'd called out to her. I've got to admit, I was gobsmacked to discover that she was stark naked when she entered the room. "What do you think? Do I pass inspection?" she asked if she did a little pirouette before me. "Bloody hell, Jenny, that's one hell of a body you've got there," I replied. "Not bad for 45, is it? It's a shame my husband never appreciated what he had. I found out he was being unfaithful, so now he gets none of it, and you can have all the attention you want. Well, within reason. I won't stay over. I keep my husband on a tight leash these days. Jenny, I'm starting to think you're quite the mischievous housekeeper. Well, I don't know how many times he's been unfaithful over the years, so this is my way of getting even. And when Mr. McIntosh mentioned that you'd been on your own for a while, I was eager to take this job," she replied, still with that playful smile on her face. "Oh, so Ronnie put you up to this, did he?" I asked. "Oh my God, no. Mr. McIntosh was a perfect gentleman. I just thought a man who's been away from women for as long as you have would like a bit of female company on the side. Jenny, Ronnie McIntosh is a bleeding solicitor. The last thing I'd describe any member of that profession as is a gentleman. All right, if you say so. But he doesn't know about any of the extras I'm prepared to throw in on this job, and I'd prefer it if you didn't make it common knowledge as well. You have my word as a gentleman and an ex-con, but aren't you in the least bit worried that you are offering to climb into bed with a man who's been convicted of murdering his last lover? Pigs might fly first, John. You were never Mary Simmons's lover, and I very much doubt you murdered her. I'd bet my life on it, maybe I am betting my life on it. But how can you be so sure? Well, let's see. Mary Simmons used to be a member of the tennis club where I worked as a cleaner. Almost every guy in the club had eyes for Mary, as I recall. No disrespect, John, but there were some pretty good-looking guys there. You're not bad, but you were never exactly Robert Redford. No offense taken, Jenny. But how do you know what I looked like back then? Newspapers and TV, of course. Your face was everywhere. Anyway, I happen to know that Mary Simmons had a preference for younger men. The younger, the better, if you catch my drift. She was very discreet, but you can't hide everything from the staff. I'm sorry, John, but at the time I thought you were too old for her taste. You've got to be kidding me. I swear on my children's lives, John. A few of us girls who worked at the club mentioned it to the police when they came around asking questions, but I don't think they took us seriously. Who would have believed that an upright citizen like Mary Simmons was involved in gang activities? Of course, the boys weren't going to say anything to the police. They were trying to pin her murder on just about anyone they could think of at the time. The youngsters just kept their heads down. Anyway, it's time we got your little problem sorted out, Jenny said, pulling the duvet off the bed. Wow, that's impressive, she commented. It didn't take long for Jenny to help me feel better. She gave me some much-needed care and attention. It had been so long since I'd felt that kind of comfort, and it was a relief. Afterwards, Jenny led me to the bathroom, where I discovered that she had filled a jacuzzi while I had been sleeping. I've always wanted to try one of these, Jenny said as we climbed in, and we enjoyed the morning relaxing in the warm water. It was a new experience for me, and although it was different, I appreciated the change of pace. Jenny had a lot of energy, and we spent a good portion of the day together before she decided it was time to head home. As she left, I couldn't help but think about her situation. Jenny had told me that she didn't expect anything in return, just discretion, which I promised to her. That evening, I went out to the village pub for a pint and a steak. Jenny had recommended the place, and she was right about the food. While there, I heard that Jenny had discovered her husband was cheating. It made me think even more about how complicated her life must be. The next morning, I woke up to find Jenny had been busy tidying up. After breakfast, we followed a similar routine to the previous day, enjoying the time together and having some light-hearted fun in the shower. Although the jacuzzi had been nice, I think we both preferred just spending time together. Later, as Jenny was washing up, she made a playful gesture, but I told her I had some things to do that day. Are you sure? She asked. Yeah, well, this is fun while it lasts, but you're soon going to find someone your own age, and that's going to change things. Oh yeah? Like who? She replied. Well, the woman who's sitting up the road in her car, for one. I'd say she's waiting for you to make an appearance. What woman is this? Oh, I don't know. Brunette drives a little white car. Helen Caffrey. How did she know where to find me? She knew, but she was snooping around the village last week before you got out. Oh, she was. Was she? Well, let's finish this and then I'll have a little word with Miss Caffrey. Mrs. Caffrey, you mean? No, that can't be right. Her father's name was Caffrey. Divorced, I should imagine, and she's returned to using her maiden name. She's definitely been married and has at least 2 kids. How do you work that one out? Wedding ring, or rather, the shadow of one on her finger and the 2 child seats in the back of her car. She was in the village shop the other day when I was there. Quite the little detective, aren't you? Well, how do you think I caught my old man with that bloody barmaid? It opened my eyes and taught me to be a lot more observant, I can tell you. Anyway, stop talking and concentrate on what you're doing. I'm nearly there. We finished our exercise, and then I went to call Helen Caffrey on her mobile. But Jenny told me not to. She'd go and take her by surprise while I tidied myself up. It would put her off her guard, Jenny suggested. I came back downstairs as Jenny was showing Helen into the lounge. I followed them in, and Jenny went off to make some tea. Still following me around, are you? I asked as we sat down. John, I'm sorry, but I knew where you were going to live when I saw you the other day. I was just being handy for when you got around to calling me. I told you I need you to tell me exactly what happened before you were arrested. Alright, if you insist. But I should imagine most of it was in the papers. Reporters take a slanted view on things, John. You said that yourself the other day. Jenny came back into the room with the tea, placing it on the coffee table. She made herself comfortable in one of the other chairs. Helen gave her a quizzical look, then looked across at me. I looked at Jenny, who gave me a big smile in return. Look at me as an independent observer and a chaperone. You never know, I might have some words of wisdom to throw in as well, Jenny said. Actually, the chaperone part made sense. After all, I was a convicted murderer. Helen could say that anything had happened. Who was going to believe a convicted murderer? Okay, Helen, as you no doubt know, I ran an employment agency in town at the time. Angela, my wife, was a stay-at-home mom looking after our 2 little ones. I knew Bill and Mary Simmons as clients. Mary's company would sometimes ask me to find both temporary and full-time staff for them. Angela and I had been to dinner with the Simmons on a couple of occasions, and we'd return the invitations. But I wouldn't have called either of them good friends. On the contrary, they weren't really my type, a little on the stuck-up side for my liking. How did Angela get on with them? Helen asked. About the same as I did, I think. She did say a few times that she didn't like the way Bill Simmons looked at her. In the end, she told me she felt like he was undressing her with his eyes. Well, once Angela had told me that, I found reason to decline any further invitations from them. That was about it. And then one morning, I heard on the TV news that Mary had been found dead in a hotel bedroom somewhere. It surprised me because there was a hint of something dodgy going on with Mary. Honestly, I wouldn't have thought Mary was the type to, you know. Well, the hotel wasn't that far from her house. The Simmons weren't big customers of mine, so besides the normal curiosity that everybody had as to what had happened, I wasn't really interested. Angela and I discussed it a little, as everyone would do when someone they know had been murdered, and that was it really. Then, early one morning a few days later, the police kicked my front door in and arrested me for murdering Mary. They had a search warrant for my house and office, where they claimed they found all kinds of stuff that connected me with Mary Simmons. You know, receipts for hotel rooms, book matches from the same hotel, and they even claimed they found my fingerprints on a glass and a champagne bottle in the room where Mary was killed. The next thing I know, some little shit who worked at the hotel swore blind that he delivered the bottle of champagne to Mary's room, and that he had seen me in there with her. Oh, and the chip for that bottle of champagne. The police claimed they found it in the suit jacket pocket I'd been wearing on the day she was murdered, and my car's registration number was on the car park attendance list. Only he could describe the car, he'd just written the number down. Well, that's about it. When we got into court, I even thought I sounded bloody guilty. Didn't you have an alibi or anything? Nope. I was in the office alone that night, doing the wages for the month. Of course, the girls on my staff said I was still doing them as they left, and that they were completed in the morning. But that didn't prove that I didn't slip out, murder Mary, and then go back and finish the job. You've no idea how those receipts and things got into your pocket? Helen asked. Yeah, the bloody police planted them. That's the only answer, I replied angrily. I always got angry when I thought about those receipts and the fingerprints on that bottle of champagne. Somehow, I can't believe that the police planted that evidence, Helen said. They must have. Who else would have the opportunity or the reason? Well, I suppose in your position I would have thought the same thing. And I should imagine that once you accused the police of planting it, you wouldn't have been the flavor of the month with them, Helen commented. Or the judge. When I realized how well they'd stitched me up, I changed my plea to guilty, I added.